Don't look now, but 2020 has already begun. Senator Kamala Harris is one of the many Democratic presidential candidates hitting Iowa this weekend. And I had the chance to sit down with her yesterday in the gorgeous Iowa State Capitol to discuss her presidential run, criminal justice reform, and her vision for the country. Senator Kamala Harris.
Joy,
thank you for being here in this beautiful Capitol.
Yeah, it's
gorgeous.
It's pretty amazing.
The
it
domes
really is.
are incredible. So I know you're here to do a town hall. You're here to talk to Iowans. You are running for president.
I am.
So I'm going to ask you sort of a big picture presidential question. What, in your view, are the three biggest crises facing this country?
One of the biggest crises that American families are facing is middle-class working families are not receiving the benefit of this economy. One of my highest priorities is lifting American and working-class families up. In fact, I'm proposing that we change the tax code to do that by giving them, families who are making less than $100,000 a year, giving them a tax credit that they can collect at $500 a month. Because, Joy, right now in America, almost half of American families cannot afford a $400 unexpected expense. And that means their car breaks down or a medical bill people didn't anticipate can topple the family in terms of their stability. And that's just not right. So one of the biggest issues facing families is that working middle-class families are suffering to get through each month, to put food on the table and pay the bills. Another example, 99% of the counties in the United States, in 99% of the counties in the United States, if you are a minimum wage worker, you cannot afford market rate for a one-bedroom apartment. So it's the cost of living, that is, wages are not keeping up with. It's the cost of housing. It's the cost of tuition. Our students are suffering because of student loan debt. So these are the highest priorities that I see that are creating crisis in American families, and for that reason, a priority for me.
So the economy, and we've heard from a lot of Iowa voters. I can tell you, we've just been going around and asking people. We've had people say things like, you know, if I was on public assistance and then I get a job, then I lose my health care or I lose my food stamps. How do you fix that? How can a president impact that?
Well, it's about having public policy in a way that actually works for working people. So part of it is understand, and then also the values upon which we base priorities for public policy. So I value the importance of everyone having access to health care and it not being a function of how much money you have, which is why I believe that we need to have Medicare for all. In America today, 1 out of 4 diabetes patients can't afford their insulin. That's just inhumane. So that's part of it, public policy. Part of public policy is saying that we've got to have a situation where we have debt-free college. Part of public policy has to be that we recognize the inequities in terms of housing and the home ownership in this country. So there are many issues.
So, you know, you're running in an incredibly crowded field. It feels like it's getting more crowded every day. How do you know, a lot of the candidates are saying similar things about Medicare for all. There are a lot of people who have come that direction, Green New Deal, things like that. How do you distinguish yourself in such a big field? How are you going to stand out?
Well, I think that the voters are going to ultimately make a decision about what distinguishes us, but I believe that, one, I bring a level of experience that includes having been a leader in local government, state government, and federal government. I have a background that is about actually fixing things, be it working on the need for homeowners to receive support, especially when there are predatory lending practices that have happened in the past and continue to occur. I have the experience of working on issues that relate to national security. I serve on the Senate Intelligence Committee. I serve on Senate Homeland Security Committee. I have a background of working on educational issues. American families right now really want to know that their leaders are going to support the education of their children, and that's an issue that we're failing parents and families on. So I think it's going to be about looking at each candidate's experience. It's going to be looking at whether we have the ability and the commitment to speaking truth and fighting for justice. Part of why I'm running is that I believe we need to restore truth and justice in our country.
I'm sorry, you talk about those issues that are about persuasion, right? This is about saying that out of all of these, maybe 20 people, you know, this is how I'm persuading you. But part of running for president is also about inspiration. It's also about inspiring people. So the Kamala Harris, what is the Kamala Harris big idea? What's the big idea behind your candidacy?
Well, I'd say one of the first is to lift up working families. The proposal that I have around lifting up families who are making less than $100,000 a year has been referred to by economists as what will be the most significant middle-class tax cut that Americans have received in generations. And that's a big issue. And for that reason, I would say others have said it, and I will then say it because it's no time to be modest, I suppose.
Right.
It's a big idea.
Yeah.
Right? It's about seeing where people are and supporting them. On the issue of affordable housing and rent, I'm proposing that if folks are paying more than 30% of their income in rent plus utilities, they should get up to a $6,000 tax credit so they can afford to get through each month. I'm proposing that no American family should have to work more, and no person should have to work more than one job to be able to put food on the table and pay the bills.
Yeah. And you know, a lot of what your background, you talk about your background in California, a lot of that has been in working in the criminal justice system.
Yes, it has.
You know, and you have had a lot of debate about your background as a prosecutor, both in San Francisco and at the statewide level. But I want to ask a prospective question.
Yes.
How would a President Kamala Harris specifically tackle reducing mass incarceration and really advancing criminal justice reform? What can actually be done?
Right. Well, I mean, part of my background, Joy, is this. I mean, my parents were active in the civil rights movement. I was born knowing the inequities in the criminal justice system. I didn't have to read about it. Nobody had to teach me about it. I made a very conscious decision to become a prosecutor, believing that if we are going to reform these systems, we should also be at the table where the decisions are being made. And so, for example, I was one of the first in the nation in elected office as an elected DA of a major city in this country to design initiatives around getting people out of the system, and particularly young men who were arrested for drug sales, by getting them jobs and counseling, a reentry initiative that ended up being a model for other places. As President of the United States, one of the things that I would do is continue that long-standing work that I've been committed to in creating incentives for states to understand we have to engage in prevention of crime as a smart way of creating public safety. Sentencing reform. We have a history of disproportionate sentencing, and in particular sentences that for people who commit the same kind of crime receive different kinds of sentences, and in particular black and brown men. We can look at how it has played out in terms of the disparities around powder cocaine and crack cocaine. So we came along pretty well in terms of reducing it, but it's still not one-to-one, and we need to change that. I am committed to also what we need to do around having affordable public defenders and affordable public defense and resourcing public defense. One of the people that I grew up with professionally is a man by the name of Jeff Adachi, who recently passed away. And he was the public defender, the elected public defender of San Francisco. The last conversation that he and I had is he said, Kamala, I want to help advise your policies, and please prioritize resourcing public defense. Because most people who are charged with crimes can't afford to come out of pocket and pay for a lawyer to defend them, their constitutional right. And that's one of my highest priorities, is doing that. I will do it now in his name and in honor of his life, of fighting for folks. But there are a number of things that have to happen, including what we need to do around detecting and addressing bias and racial bias, implicit and explicit, in the criminal justice system, and in particular within law enforcement. When I was Attorney General of California, we created the first of its kind implicit bias and procedural justice training of police officers, together with law enforcement leaders, recognizing that that needs to be addressed. When people carry a gun, if they're holding on to racial bias and making decisions about who they stop, who they arrest, or potentially who they shoot, and if that decision is informed by bias, we need to deal with that, and we know it does happen.
Right, and you're talking about specifically issues that face, African Americans. We're seeing all of these videos of people barbecuing while black people being confronted by even civilians, having the police called on them. These are race-based issues. They're very directly racial. I think what a lot of Americans, when African Americans talk to me about this race, and even talking about the Obama era, they say, when a black person achieves power, the disincentives toward doing race-based policy are so strong. The larger world wants you to do rising tide lifts all boats, not race-conscious or race-specific policy, because then you appear biased. If you were to be elected president, you would not only be the first woman president, you would be the second African-American president. The Indian American community is, has a claim on you as well. Would you feel, would it be difficult for you to advocate race-based policy, or would you feel that you'd have to do just rising tide?
Look, here's how I feel about this, and I want to talk about the issue of identity politics, Joy. I gave a speech about this at Netroots last year.
Yep.
So this term identity politics, people will use that term. It's like people used to talk about the race card.
Right.
And they'll bring this term up when you talk about issues that are about race, about sexual orientation, about religion. They'll bring it up when we're talking about civil rights issues as a way to marginalize the issue, as a way to, frankly, try to silence you or shut you up. And we need to call that what it is, which is to try and divert away from a conversation that needs to happen in America. Why? One, because we must speak truth. Racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, anti-Semitism are all real in this country. So we need to have that conversation and address it. But two, and this is equally important, how America deals with these issues and the disparities and also the hate that causes these issues to become lethal in proportion. How America deals with these issues is a matter of American identity. This is not about identity politics, and if it is, it's about the identity of the United States of America. How we handle those issues will be about our collective identity.
There is much more of my interview. Just this weekend alone, Michael Bennet, Julian Castro, Kamala Harris, and others are holding events across the state. I sat down with Senator Kamala Harris in Iowa to discuss her presidential run in an increasingly polarized America and Donald Trump's impact on America's standing in the world. Take a look. Well, let's talk about some of these bigger sort of identity issues. I mean, we've recently seen a Coast Guardsman, a lieutenant in the Coast Guard, charged with plotting a terror attack, a domestic terror attack.
Yeah.
You were targeted, several of your colleagues in Congress, several of my colleagues in media, both at MSNBC and CNN, but a whole list of people who, many of them are frequent targets of this president, to be honest. There's a sense in the community that looks at hate crimes that they are increasing, and that people, whether Donald Trump wants them to or not, are calling his name or are adopting the same enemies that he feels that he has. How does a black woman win the presidency in a country where the trend is toward more racial polarization?
So to your point, we have seen a rise in hate crimes. And I know, as Attorney General of California, I used to publish the annual hate crimes report. And it is the rates of crimes, hate crimes against African Americans, against immigrants, anti-Semitism is on the rise. There is no question over the last 2 years we've seen an increase. So how does one deal with it, and how specifically do I deal with it? Head on. Head on. And as far as I'm concerned, I, in my heart, in my soul, in my mind, in my brain, know that anybody who loves our country rejects any form of hate. Anyone in our country who says they are proud to be an American and to salute that flag should understand that that flag is supposed to represent the fight for equality for all people. And the way that I think of the country I love is this. The very nature and the strength of our country is based on the fact that we are aspirational. That we were a country that was founded on ideals, including the notion that all people are equal. And the moment we stop fighting to reach those ideals is the moment that we become weak as a nation. I'll also say this, Joy. I will fight every day to reach those ideals. I am also clear-eyed that we have not reached those ideals yet.
Right.
Which is why we must have honest, though they may be uncomfortable, conversations about race and all of the other issues that we are now discussing. But truly, I think that the people of our country in 2020 will be able to see who wants to be a leader for all people, who is not going to shy away from difficult conversations. I think that the American public wants a leader who will speak truth and who will fight for justice. And I'm prepared to do that.
Well, you know, speaking of that and the American image, a lot of it is the way the world looks at us.
Yes.
And when the American people, whether they support Donald Trump or not, see the Vice President of the United States stand up in front of our allies and greet them in the name of the President of the United States and get silence.
I bring greetings from the 45th President of the United States of America, President Donald Trump.
And when they see the President of the United States seeming to want to realign us with people like Vladimir Putin or friendliness toward the North Korean dictator and away from our allies, how does the next president solve that? How would you fix that? Can it be fixed?
It can be fixed, and I think that the people who are our friends and allies around the world know that a lot of what we've been seeing over the last 2 years is not reflective of the American people. And that the next president of the United States will remind folks of who we really are, and that is a nation that values our friendships, that works with our allies, that tries to find common ground, that we understand that there is strength in understanding common ideals and common goals. I think that we will be able to recover what has been lost when people understand that the people of our country value our integrity and take pride in the fact that, aside from what has happened in the last couple of years, we've failed sometimes, but we have always been a nation that fights for the best of who we can be.
Well, let's talk about, because the image of the United States predates, obviously, Donald Trump. And some of the foreign policy challenges have been right here in our hemisphere.
Yeah.
And we have a long history of what you might call malintervention in our hemisphere. Well, now we've got crises that are brewing near home. Venezuela, Haiti. The President of the United States has really demagogued some of the real crises in places like Honduras, where we've seen children taken from their parents trying to escape from that triangle.
That's right.
In a Kamala Harris foreign policy, do we intervene or do we need to stay out?
So what we do is we work with our allies. What we do is we recognize and call out human rights abuses. What we do is we don't shut our borders to those who are fleeing the murder capitals of the world and coming here seeking refuge, seeking support, seeking safety. That's what happens in a Kamala Harris administration. What happens is that we do not conduct foreign policy by tweet. What happens is that we do not approach foreign policy in a way that is about unilateralism, that we understand that there is strength in numbers when we have common interests. And it is actually a reflection of our strength to work with our allies when and where we can.
But what if, I mean, there's a fundamental mistrust in the United States that has been created. By the time the next president takes office, that's not going to go away. It's not going to be as easy as just getting back in the game, right? I mean, how do we get back the trust of these allies?
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head, Joy. So trust. A relationship of trust, we know in our personal and professional lives, the relationship of trust by its nature is a reciprocal relationship. You give and you receive trust. And one of the most important ingredients in trust is truth. And so part of how we restore trust is we speak truth. We've been not seeing a lot of truth speaking out of this administration, and that's part of the problem. That's part of the problem.
Yeah. Well, there's another issue that is actually, it's feeding into Donald Trump's big issue, obviously, is immigration. It's the thing that his base is the most inured to him because of. Climate change is part of the reason it's happening. Part of the movement of people is the change in the climate that is, creating the catastrophes like what we saw in Puerto Rico.
That's right.
Which has still not been made whole.
That's right. Or that it's snowing in Pasadena, California.
Right. Well, what do we do about it? We are no longer in the Paris Climate Accords.
I know. What do we do? It's outrageous. So first of all, climate change is presenting an existential threat to our nation. And the world. What am I saying? Our nation. The globe.
Yeah.
And we have an administration that is focused on spewing science fiction instead of science fact. We were part of a group of nations who understood that collectively we can make a difference. And we have got to take seriously, all of us, the reality that if we don't act and act with a sense of urgency, it will be to our collective peril. I support what we need to do around creating and having as goals timelines around how we're going to address greenhouse gas emissions. We as human beings actually have within our power the ability to change our behaviors, not in drastic ways, by the way, to reduce the effects of climate change. And this administration has failed us. They are looking backward and not realizing that it is a smart approach to think about how we can reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, how we can improve what we do around conservation and recycling of water. I mean, I could go on and on. But what I do know is this administration has failed to think about the future. And I just have to stress that, Joy, because to your very point, even if the outcome of November of 2016 had been different, we would be looking at these shifting populations, to your point. We would be looking at a globe that is very much in flux. You can attribute it to climate change, you can attribute it to automation, right?
Yeah.
And I think the question before us right now is not only to look in a mirror and ask, who are we? And part of the answer will be, we are better than this. But part of the issue before us right now is, what is our vision for the future? For our nation and also our role on the globe. And right now, we have an opportunity with 2020 to really have that conversation. And my role in this is to suggest that our vision of the future, is one in which it's a picture in which everyone can see themselves and everyone participates, and where we claim our rightful role of being part of the future in terms of creating a path towards a world that is going to be sustainable and also a world in which everyone participates.
Okay, I have a quick lightning round.
Yes,
I'm
okay.
doing a lightning round, right? You've mentioned some of the committees that you're on. You didn't mention the Judiciary Committee, very important committee.
Yes, it is.
You're a lawyer.
Yes,
We've
I
established
am.
that,
Yes,
I think.
I am.
Kenneth, do you believe that there's anything in the Constitution that says a sitting president cannot be indicted?
I don't know that that's the case. Yeah, I think that'll be litigated.
And if the Mueller report, which we are all anticipating, comes out and finds that the president maybe didn't commit crimes, it was like an accessory to crimes that were committed, people have been convicted of crimes, do you believe that there would be enough votes in the Senate to impeach him?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. We're going to have to see.
What about this upcoming vote on overturning the president's emergency declaration? Do you think there'll be a veto-proof majority to overturn it?
Listen, I think that this is a crisis of the president's own making. It clearly is not an emergency. The president has created this crisis to pursue his vanity project called a wall. It would be an absolute misuse of taxpayers' money, billions of dollars that otherwise could go into building infrastructure, that could go into creating jobs, that could go into lifting up middle class and working families. I think that we should absolutely, Congress should act, and also that we should push that case into the courts, because I think that the courts would reject it as an abuse of power, frankly.
So I think this is, as we wrap up here, this is a strange question that I have never had to ask a presidential candidate or really any politician. There are conspiracy theories that are now becoming a part of our politics. Our politics is not just waged by candidates, maybe even giving opposition research about each other. This whole other realm. Some of it's spread by humans, some of it's spread by bots.
Yeah, for sure.
At this point, you are Jussie Smollett's aunt. There are conspiracy theories about you. You seem to be the focus of a lot of the negative information going on and the cyber activity. Is your campaign prepared for it? What are you going to do about it so that you don't have a repeat of what happened in 2016?
I mean, you're right. I know that our campaign has been a target of that. And I mean, and only in the race for 4 weeks. So it's a reality. You're right. I, in my heart, believe that voters are smarter than what they're trying to spin. In my heart, I'm here in Iowa, I was in New Hampshire, I was in South Carolina, I'm spending time around our country. And I believe that people are smarter than these people who are spinning these conspiracies, smarter than they realize or know. And when I sit down and talk with folks, they want to know about my plan for middle class and working families. They are applauding the tax bill that I'm proposing. And that's my focus. My focus is not going to be on responding to conspiracy theories.